Hello YouTube. So I know I'm a bit late to the whole DEHYA train. I've had other videos that I wanted to prioritize. I've been working 60 hours a week plus battling an undiagnosed heart condition, so haven't really had the time to talk about her. However, there are some things that I do want to talk about DEHYA with still, even though it's late. This isn't going to be like a full, in-depth DEHYA guide or anything like that. Rather, I'm just going to look at her and what I believe are her most optimal use cases as both a DPS and a support, and break down how she compares to her competition in those roles. With that out of the way, let's jump right into this. So starting with DEHYA as a DPS, in my opinion, the only team worth talking about is Pure Pyro. I've seen people try things like Forward Melt and Vaporize with Mona, but in my opinion, those are both incredibly copium. From what I've seen, we should just stick with Pure Pyro if we're trying to be optimal. When it comes to Pure Pyro, in addition to DEHYA, there are two other main variants of this team, Xinyan Pure Pyro and Klee Pure Pyro. I'll talk about Klee later, but for now, let's talk about DEHYA versus Xinyan. DEHYA versus Xinyan has been a hot topic for pretty much all of DEHYA's banner, and there is good reason for this. In the Pure Pyro team, DEHYA and Xinyan both fill the same role as the main on-field DPS. They also both provide interruption resistance and tankiness, Xinyan through her shield and DEHYA through the field from her skill. They both even take roughly equivalent amounts of field time, typically 9 to 10 seconds. You have probably heard that Xinyan does more damage than DEHYA in this team. Before I show you my calculations on this, let me break down why Xinyan would be able to do more damage than DEHYA in the first place. First, let's look at their stats. Xinyan has a base attack of 249, which is actually the highest base attack of all 4-star units in the game. She also has a base defense of 799, which is the highest in the game for 4-star units as well, tied only with Noelle and Yunjin at the same amount. This is relevant because Xinyan has some defense scaling. Xinyan's Ascension stat is 24% attack. This is one of the best Ascension stats a 4-star DPS can have, since they are unable to ascend with crit. DEHYA has a base attack of 265. This is slightly higher than Xinyan's, but she doesn't have an attack percent Ascension to go with it. Instead, she ascends with HP percent. DEHYA does have some HP scaling, but it is much lower than her attack scaling, so this is a very underwhelming Ascension stat for her to have, especially when 5-star units are able to ascend with crit. DEHYA does also have a very high base HP of 15675, but as I mentioned, her HP scaling is quite low. However, what really matters is how their stats compare in the team with all the buffs and everything accounted for. For this comparison, I'll be looking at a C6 Xinyan with Redhorn Stone Thresher compared to a C0 DEHYA with Beacon at full stacks. The team for both units is Kazuha, Zhongling, Bennett. Xinyan is on 4-piece Lava Walker with Defense Sands and Pyro Cup and Crit Circlet. So in this team, Xinyan's stats are as follows. She has 16-7 defense, of which 50% is converted to attack from her C6. It's also used for the defense scaling from Redhorn. She's at 3700 attack while her C6 is up, and 2886 when it is not. She has 69.2 crit rate, 217.6 crit damage, and 149.6 damage bonus for her pyro damage, and 50% for her physical damage. DEHYA is on 4-piece Emblem with ER Sense, Pyro Cup, and Crit Damage Circlet. Her stats here are as follows: 32,048 HP, 77.82 crit rate, 178.4 crit damage, 3203 attack, 162.8 damage bonus on her burst, and 114.6 damage bonus on her skill. So what we can see from this is that in the exact same team with the exact same buffs, Xinyan, even on a defense sense, has higher attack than DEHYA and higher CV due to her weapon. The only stat that DEHYA wins out on, excluding HP since that is hard to account for, is damage bonus from burst, since Emblem gives more damage bonus than Lava Walker. However, even then, she doesn't have that much more. Now let's look at their scalings and what their total multipliers over a full rotation looks like. I will be using the numbers for their crowned talents for this. A full charged attack on Xinyan hits about 10 times plus the final swing. She will also usually use at least one normal attack. In total, this comes out to 16.11% scaling. Her skill, between the cast damage and the damage over time, has 788.4% scaling. Xinyan's burst hits with the initial cast as well as 7 hits of damage over time. This is another 13.19% scaling. Adding all of her damage instances together, Xinyan's total scaling of her full rotation comes out to be about 3,718.4%. As for DEHYA, she can deal damage on her skill from the initial cast, as well as the recast and the damage over time. Assume you use her skill's recast and get 4 instances of damage over time from the field. That's 875.8% attack scaling and 7.44% HP scaling. As for her burst, just like Xinyan's charged attack, it hits 10 times plus the final hit at the end. This adds up to 2,027.7% attack scaling and 34.8% HP scaling. So overall, throughout a full rotation, DEHYA has about 2,903.5% attack scaling and 42.24% HP scaling. This is very noticeably lower than Xinyan's total scaling. The HP scaling is hard to compare to attack scaling, but to put into perspective how low this is, it is only 2% higher than a single Yelan skill cast. With all that explained, we can now understand exactly why and how Xinyan is able to do more damage than DEHYA, despite being a 4-star. She has both better stats and better scalings than DEHYA. Now, let's take a look at the calcs and see exactly how much more damage she does. Okay, so first, let me mention that these calcs are done under Keqing main standards, except every character is triple crowned. What we can see here is that Xinyan is doing about 440,000 damage, compared to DEHYA doing 325,000. This is about a 35% difference in personal damage, and an 11% difference in the team DPS. However, we do have to acknowledge that there is some nuance here, such as investment levels. So for that, I have also done calcs with both of them at several different levels of investment. So here, I have compared the team DPS of Xinyan and DEHYA's team, while including calcs for both units with their best 4-star weapon at both Refinement Rank 1 and Refinement Rank 5. I also included calcs with DEHYA at C1, since DEHYA being a standard banner character makes getting her to C1 fairly realistic. I have DEHYA on Aku Omaru for her 4-star weapon, because Serpent Spine is actually pretty bad on her due to how her kit works. For Serpent Spine, I have Xinyan assumed to be at 3 stacks of its passive. I usually calc her with 5 stacks, but for the sake of being as fair to DEHYA as possible, I have it at 3 stacks instead. From what we can see here, even giving DEHYA Beacon or her C1 isn't enough for her to beat Xinyan even on an R1 spine. She needs both C1 and an R5 Aku Omaru to do this. She only beats Xinyan with R5 Spine or R1 Red Horn if DEHYA herself has both C1 and Beacon, but even then it's by less than 1%. The difference to stats and scaling between Xinyan and DEHYA has is simply that large. Now you might be thinking, okay, sure, but calcs and cheat DPS don't tell the full picture, and you are 100% correct on that. However, the thing is, when it comes to practicality, Xinyan still beats DEHYA even there. For starts, DEHYA's 9 seconds of infinite poise does not last the full rotation, but you can have Xinyan's shield for a full rotation. This is because Xinyan's shield lasts up to 12 seconds, and you get it both from her skill and burst. So if you space them out rather than using burst right after skill, you are actually able to get 100% uptime on it. And although Xinyan's shield is known to be weak, this is extremely overstated, especially if you're using Xinyan on a defense stance, which is what I have included in these calcs. This is not only because it scales with the defense, but also because the more defense a unit has, the less damage they take. That includes the damage their shield takes. Thus, by having a unit with high defense like Xinyan on field, the effective strength of the shield is higher than what the shield's HP itself would suggest. I'm trying to stay away from using personal anecdotes, but if you have seen my Xinyan gameplay, you know that I seldom ever have issues with her shield breaking. Another example of Xinyan having better practicality than DEHYA is particle generation and energy requirements. Xinyan and DEHYA both make 4 total particles from their skills. However, Xinyan makes all of hers on cast, while DEHYA's are split across the full 12-second duration and cannot be produced during her burst, which makes it very hard for her to get any of her own particles. This results in DEHYA having fairly high ER requirements even in the pure Pyro team. She can still be forced to run in energy sands. On the other hand, Xinyan making all of her particles on cast is great, because it means you can choose either to have her catch them all for herself, or funnel all 4 of them into Zhongling or Bennett if they happen to need them at the time. Also, because most of Xinyan's damage comes from her charged attack and not her burst, she isn't really forced into a strict rotation. You can, for example, use her burst early in one rotation, and then use it late in the next rotation. This can allow her to effectively never run into energy issues, and why she can get away with occasionally funneling her particles into Zhongling or Bennett instead of herself. Also, because DEHYA's entire DPS window is in her 4-second burst duration, you can find her losing all of her DPS from something as simple as getting trapped in one of those hydro bubbles that some enemies make. With Xinyan, this will still be a DPS loss because it's a DPS loss to anyone, but it is much less of an issue because you can simply just start back charged attacking once freed from the bubble. I know that may sound like a very niche scenario, but there are other scenarios where you can find this happening to DEHYA as well, such as getting frozen. I'm not saying this is a huge deal, but it is definitely something to be aware of. But yeah, in short, my opinion is that DEHYA is kinda outclassed by Xinyan both from a mathematical and practical standpoint. However, I do still think this is going to be the most optimal way to play DEHYA if you want to use her as a DPS. I did mention Klee earlier, so I want to cover that super quick. So as we can see, there's honestly not that much to say here. Klee does more than double DEHYA's damage in the same team. It's a no contest. With that said, you cannot argue that DEHYA has practical advantages over Klee, since DEHYA can't be staggered, and helps her team avoid being staggered as well with her skill. And this is true, that's definitely a practical advantage DEHYA has. Practical advantages like this can be worth more than doing more damage. However, I think the gap here is way too big for that to be enough of a practical advantage in DEHYA's favor compared to Klee. Okay, now that we have explored DPS DEHYA, let's talk about support DEHYA. When it comes to using DEHYA as a support, she starts having competition with Doma rather than Xinyan. DEHYA has several issues as a support, such as the survivability she provides not being enough, and the short duration of her infinite poise making shields usually just better. Her pyro application also only happens about every 3 seconds, which makes her pretty bad in reaction-based teams. With those flaws considered, in my opinion, the places where she can be used as a valid support is with DPS that really appreciate having poise, and also have a short enough DPS window to maximize the 9S from poise from DEHYA, and still having a healer on the team to keep them alive. With those considerations, the units I came up with are Wanderer, Ganyu, and Yoimiya. I tried doing math on using her with Ganyu and Yoimiya, but it was honestly too depressing, so I kinda gave up on those. However, I did complete the math for using her with Wanderer. Wanderer is a unit that having a shield of her poise can be very valuable with, since he has the lowest poise in the entire game and gets interrupted by almost anything. DEHYA can actually fill this role for Wanderer. This is because he takes about 12 to 13 seconds of fill time, and 2 of those seconds are in an iframe from his burst. Thus, DEHYA's poise buff should only be down for about 1 to 2 seconds of his fill time. In that time, you can use the free dodge from Wanderer's A4 passive if need be. Now I did mention that DEHYA is mainly competing with Doma as a support, but for shielders, Wanderer also has access to Layla and Zhongli as really good options. So let's see how DEHYA compares to those 3. So these calcs are done using a C1 Wanderer with his signature weapon. All 4-star units are at C6, and DEHYA/Zhongli are at C0. Kachink main standards, but with everyone triple crowned. With these calcs, we can see that DEHYA is technically the best option for the slot if she is on Wolf's Gravestone and the passive is up. However, that is not realistic because this weapon has a very jank trigger condition and a lot of downtime. Most of the time, you won't have the passive at all. There aren't any other good buffing claymores DEHYA can use, so her only other real option is Favonius. With her on Favonius, she falls behind Thoma and Layla still, but she isn't that far behind. She is also a bit ahead of Zhongli for this slot. This is because Zhongli's value is diminished with Wanderer due to Faruzan already providing resistance shred. She also does beat Thoma if he's not at C6 yet. Now with the mathematicals accounted for, let's look into the practicality. What's really nice about DEHYA is that because she isn't a shield, you do not have to worry about her breaking and you losing the interruption resistance. You will simply have it for the full 9 seconds no matter what. With Thoma, his shield is very strong when stacked, and even if it breaks, he will simply create a new one from scratch. Therefore, there isn't much risk with getting interrupted with him. However, it is still possible. Aggressive enemies, such as the concentrated beasts, might break his shield and then hit you again before he can create a new one, which will result in you getting interrupted. Again, this isn't a huge risk, but it is something worth keeping in mind. With Zhongli, his shield is incredibly strong, and there is very little fear of it breaking. The main practicality concern with Zhongli is that the range of his pillars is pretty small, and enemies can also break them. This means that sustaining the tenacity buff with him can be difficult. You can mitigate this by simply using the set on Faruzan, but Faruzan's damage will be a bit less. Granted, she is a very small portion of the team's damage, so this doesn't matter that much. Finally, Layla's shield is also very strong, but it's not quite as strong as Zhongli's since he gets an extra 150% absorption on it. So the risk of it breaking is higher than Zhongli's, but still not a huge concern. The main practicality with issue comes from if you don't have Freedom Sworn, her rotation becomes kinda jank. This is because without Freedom, in order for Layla to be good, we have to get Wanderer's Cryo A1 for 20% crit rate. In order to do this, you kinda have to skip out on Bennett's skill, because his 2U makes it almost impossible. If you skip Bennett's skill, you have to use Favonius on him to have enough energy to burst every rotation. And using Favonius on Bennett is a pretty big loss to his attack buff. And if we do get Wanderer's Cryo A1 with Layla, she can't hold Freedom Sworn, because if she is melting, that means the aura is Pyro, not Cryo. So basically, what I'm saying is, if Layla isn't on Freedom Sworn, the rotation becomes a bit jank, and that's mainly where her practicality issue comes from. With all that accounted for, I think it's fair to say that using DEHYA as the shield slot for Wanderer is actually a pretty legit use for her as a support. She may not mathematically be the best option, but she isn't that far behind the competition. And if you don't have a C6 Thoma or have Layla, then she actually can be the best option for you to use there. Since she is a standard banner 5-star, having her at C0 but not having Thoma at C6 or Layla isn't that unrealistic of a scenario. But yeah, that is about all I wanted to talk about with DEHYA. To answer the question in the title, I do think DEHYA is pretty bad, but some of the negativity about her has probably been exaggerated. She's overall pretty bad, but she isn't completely useless. If you liked today's video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Maybe even let a comment letting me know what you think. Thanks. Bye.